Let's see who tunes on in. We're here with two authors of a book that discuss the history of the creation and then some of the panorama of New York City. I'm going to do this live stream in portrait mode because I don't want to kind of bother people around me, but I do want to show you what this special tour is. So hopefully people are respectful in the chat. And actually, let me just do this really quick because you got to subscribe at least if you're going to troll. And I want to give you guys a little bit of the flavor of this thing. As we wait for this thing to begin, a quick thing about what the panorama means for me, which is I have obsessed over this thing since I was a kid. I first saw this thing when I was 11 years old, and I still feel the same way today like I did when I was 11 years old seeing this. So let's catch up with the chat because people are saying hello, like Simon and the artist Rose and Alistair Bruce and Dave Jeffries and Mary Lily and Travis Weeks. Travis, you watch a lot of my replays, man. Thank you so much. Good to see everybody, people. Welcome. Good to see you, Carter J. Good to see you, GM Chris. But yeah, we're going to have a little walkthrough of the panorama with two authors of a book. There's a book coming out that talks about the history of the panorama of New York City, which if you don't know what the panorama is, stay tuned because you're going to see it. It's the world's largest architectural scale model. So it's pretty incredible if you've never seen it before. Mary Lily, good to see you. Carter J, Robert T, For Reals, Carlos. Your replays are all awesome. Can't get enough. I appreciate that, Travis. Good to see you, William, out here in Brooklyn, and Ciro, and Janine, and Leela, and Raynette, and Oleg, and good to see you, Janine. I don't know why Nightbot put you in a timeout, but I mean, if you're not in a timeout, but I don't know. Nightbot's so weird when it comes to emojis. Good to see you, RJ. Welcome. But they wrote a book, and we're going to hear some things about the creation of the book, and I think we're going to hear some things about the creation of the panorama. But the panorama is one of these things that I've live streamed many times, and I'm excited to be able to bring you here. The replays are awesome. Good to see you, Colleen. So I don't know what's going to happen. I just got here. And people are gathering. There's a really cool exhibit featuring the 1964-65 World's Fair, and they're playing the Wonderful World of Chemistry film. If you've never seen it before, another thing I slightly obsess about. Good to see you, Inky Boo and Time Lapse. Welcome. Again, this is not going to be a normal live stream today because I kind of want to focus. I actually want to watch this for myself. I want to see what's going to happen. I'm very excited to hear the discussion and the kind of tour that we're about to do. But like I said at the beginning, I have obsessed over this thing since I was a kid, and it's always special. So I'm going to try to document a little bit of this for you guys. We're in portrait mode because I don't want to bother the people around me. I don't want to be too overwhelming by filming with microphones and stuff like that. But I think after the event, after I get my book signed, I just got a book that's going to be released in March. I think we'll start a live stream inside, a proper live stream, and I'll show you the panorama one more time, and then we'll walk through the park, and I'll walk back to the train because it's really cold outside. Good to see you there, KK13. Welcome. But people are gathering right now. It's exciting. Like I said, I have always been obsessed with the panorama of New York City. I want to thank my social studies teacher, Dr. Quinn, or Mr. Quinn. He was also a doctorate in education. But Mr. Quinn brought us out here when I was 11 years old. I had no idea what this thing was. And we learned about reading maps and using latitude and longitude, and we used the panorama. And I will never forget. It's funny how this place still smells the same, especially when you get into the panorama room. Smells exactly the same. Good to see you, Diana. Good to see you, Denise. Good to see you, Adriana. Good to see you, Activity 79. I think we're going to begin in a few moments here. You can feel the gathering of humans now, but it is cool, Lisa. Good to see you. Yes, we're in the Queens Museum at the Panorama of New York City. And we're about to have a discussion. They're gonna I have a moment here. Oops. Sorry about that, guys. Good to see you, Timeline. Good to see you, Neville. Welcome. Best go shovel round. Okay, have a good one, RJ. Yes, indeed, Neville. Thank you so much. I think we're gonna head in here. Oh, did I just unplug the phone? Hold on, people. It's so cold. Oh, look at that. Doesn't wanna. Come on, baby. Oh, did I just completely F the cable here? Oh no. Did I just F my own cable just now with my boots? Oh man. I tell you oh man, that sucks. Okay. The port on my phone is really going. So again, why format? Here's the explanation, because I don't want to bother the people around me. So no, everything is not okay because the port on the phone is really loose. Let me do something here. This thing is about to begin, so I gotta be fast. The tips were okay today. It was only 3 people. Tips were good though. Good to see you, Sally. Just messed up the GAM. The port is already messed up on this phone, and now I think I messed it up even more. There we go. That's what I want. Okay, anyway. Come on, phone. We can do it. Oh. The port on this phone is officially cooked. A lot of people here waiting for this event, which is cool. All right. I think now it's going to hold and it's going to charge. Let me show you the book really quick. Good to see you, Boris. Oh, does it remind you of when I flew in a helicopter? So here's the book. I want to keep it really nice. And I literally just bought it. This is so cool. I have obsessed over this thing since I was a kid. And now that I have a book, we'll do the opening here on the stream. I want to get this thing signed by the authors of the book. It's the 60th anniversary of this thing. But they go into how this thing was built, the idea behind it. I cannot wait to get home and just stare at this thing. And oh my God, the pictures are amazing. Oh, it is really like a picture book, guys. But they go into the building of it. And again, I have obsessed over this thing since I was a kid. I literally, when I come out here to Flushing Meadow, I literally I know, I'm gonna get the book signed and it's not even available on Amazon yet. You gotta wait until March if you wanna buy it. But it's available here in the museum right now. Oh my goodness. But we got a lot of people here. Again, I'm gonna do this in portrait mode so I don't bother the people around me. And plus, I really want to focus on seeing the presentation. I'm really intrigued about how we got to the book and how we got it all together. And oh, we're going in. Yes. This is exciting. Good to see you, Sal.
We are celebrating today the launch of our book, The Panorama of NYC, which is a definitive publication with amazing archival photos, essays, all about the history of the panorama, its importance as an object, and also its legacy in the greater scheme of New York City conversation. So thank you so much for joining me today and our lovely guests. So I'm just going to do a super quick intro, and then we'll go right in and really start the conversation today. So we have James Sanders and Vishanti Rao. We'll start with Vishanti. So Vishanti is an anthropologist, curator, and writer. She has focused on really displacement, memory, speculation, thinking about cities internationally, and imaginings of the future in accordance with urban populations and the idea of the city. She has a PhD in sociocultural anthropology from the University of Chicago and has most recently been a visiting professor at Yale School of Architecture. She also curated for the Lisbon Architectural Triennial in 2022, the Kochi Biennial in 2016, and then, very excitingly, is curating the Shern Biennial in 2026. So, Vishanti, thank you so much for coming today, and Vishanti also had an incredible conversation with Valerie Paley, who's a librarian at the New York Historical Society, in the publication, really incredible combo. And then moving on to James Sanders. So James is an architect, author, filmmaker, who's been working for 4 decades and has an incredible understanding of the urban landscape, but also ideas about the urban landscape, infrastructure, and cities. So he's done books, films, exhibitions, digital projects, digital media, and perhaps most well known for New York, a documentary film which aired on PBS and is an 8-part series conceived and written with Rick Burns. And then we also did an incredible project in 2022 at Grand Central Terminal called The Constant Future, the Center of the Regional Land. So these are our 2 incredible speakers. And pretty much just to give you a lay of what we're going to do today, we're going to pop into the panorama. James and Vishanti will just be at a platform and will kind of be stationary, but you all are very welcome to move around, situate yourselves wherever, enjoy the conversation, and we'll do some question and answer at the end, and then come out here for book signing and more just general chatter. So thank you all again for coming. It's really
Oh my God, I'm so excited, everyone. I gotta talk about one of my favorite things in the whole city. A discussion of one of my favorite places in the city, my favorite things in the city. I'm so excited. You have no idea. I mean, the panorama. I mean, the Unisphere looks so great in the snow today. But good to see everybody, people. Again, this is I'm not going to be doing too much talking, obviously, because this is a discussion, and they're going to be discussing how we got to the book here. And yeah, I guess this is officially the book launch. Yeah, Nabul, I love this place too. Right, Nabul, you came out here, right? You came out here and you took the family out here, right? Next time you come back to New York, we got to have to do this together. Are you? Do you want to do the panorama? It's accessible around the other side. So this is for the book signing. Yeah, this is for the book launch, and they're gonna discuss the panorama and everything. But the panorama of New York City.
Oh, okay.
Is the world's largest architectural scale model. It's for the entire city. But this is only stairs. So you could go around the other side, and it's a ramp. Okay. Yeah, if people get out of hand, I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to mod. But good to see you, Tracy. This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing, people. Oh my God, I'm so excited about this. Good to see you, Neil. You know, they have the exhibition for the 64-65 fair, and to have this little event here is so exciting. Oh, if you've never seen it, here it is. Ooh, sorry. I'm gonna go up high.
Okay.
We're gonna go up high. This is so
All
exciting.
right, let's get started. So I'm just going to dive right in. So for those who may or may not know just the history of this object, so the Panorama was debuted at the 1964 New York World's Fair, which was held in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park. This building was the building that actually was kind of a mainstay of the park. It was built in 1939 and was the New York City building both at the 39 World's Fair and the 64 World's Fair. So for 1964, there was a decision that, of course, with New York City being the host, they wanted a pavilion that really proved the incredible value, the incredible imagination of New York City. Needless to say, the World's Fair president was Robert Moses for that 1964 fair, and the Treasurer Bridge and Tunnel Authority, which he was the chairperson of, actually had offices in this building. So when the idea began in 1960, they decided that this panorama would be a great way to show people in an activated and imaginative way visually through New York City. So it was, construction actually started in 1961, and it took 3 years, over 100 people to build this incredible object that we see in front of us. So with Jasmine and James, we were speaking a lot about, naturally, the kind of idiosyncrasies of this object, but of course what it was when it debuted, right, in 1964. And this was really a reflection of Robert Moses' life work. His highways, his bridges, which you see a multitude from, the Triborough to, the Whitestone Bridge, Whitestone Bronx. All of these had been built in Robert Moses' time in city government, which began in really the late 1920s. So he had seen quite a bit occur, and infrastructure was a really big part of it. So I want this conversation really thinking about the fact that in 1994, this is before the Power Broker, which was released, written by Caro in 1974, that really took us through Robert Moses' figure, his journey as a city politician and official. But no one necessarily really knew Robert Moses' role and the magnitude of the effect that he had on the city, perhaps until seeing this model. So I wanted to start by just thinking about, what should we look at this model and think about people not knowing in 1964 about their city, as far as, what amenities were available, how they shot around, how they consisted, etc.
Sure. Well, thanks. I'll take that. What Lynn DiGianti and I were discussing was that Robert Moses, of course, now has come to be a character of sort of slightly diabolical stature in New York. Everyone who knows anything about New York and its history knows about Robert Moses, and of course, Robert Caro has the most to do with that. And our series, my series with Rick Burns, which was originally going to be a story of Robert Moses, had something to do with that as well. And then, of course, all of the other literature and history that's gone on in the last, let's say, well, the book came out exactly 50 years ago. But what I was telling Lynn was that before the book came out, no one had heard of Robert Moses, unless you were a municipal government geek or an infrastructure nerd. You had never heard of Robert Moses. I knew a little bit about Robert Moses because my father, who had grown up in Laurelton, which is over there, and had watched, as he was born in 1920, and he had watched them build what was then called the Circumferential Parkway, for obvious reasons, now called the Belt Parkway. And he had watched over his lifetime the whole career of Robert Moses. So he used to tell me when we crossed the Triborough Bridge or wherever we were going, Triborough Bridge here, of course all this was built by Robert Moses. And I took that in as a boy without quite understanding it. And I said that the day I sat down in July of 1974 and opened the first of the New Yorker magazine articles, people don't remember this, but the Power Broker was excerpted, serialized in publishing terms, in 4 huge articles. I didn't cover the whole book, but I covered a big chunk of the book, in the New Yorker over the summer of '74. And as I read the first words by somebody I'd never heard of, I said, aha, now I'm going to find out everything my father's been telling me all these years. And it really was, I who was interested in stuff had really very little idea. So I say all that because I think that this extraordinary miniature was, in a strange way, had a kind of autobiographical component of it. Remember that Robert Moses became president of the World's Fair Corporation around 1961 or 2. He was in his 80s. He had been active in New York City and New York State. He's been building in New York City and New York State since 1924, and here it was 1964 World's Fair. He had to step down from all these other positions for conflict of interest. How quaint that sounds. Conflict of interest reasons. So he was really coming to the twilight of his career, although he still ran the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority. That was one thing he did not have to quit. So I think in a funny way, it was an autobiographical, biographical attempt on Robert Moses' part to capture something which was otherwise uncapturable, which was his impact on the 5-borough region. Now properly, you couldn't have done it logistically, because you'd be halfway to the New York State Pavilion, but you would have to add all of Long Island, where he had begun his career with the Long Island State Park and Parkway Commission at Jones Beach. You would have had to add Westchester, where he built all of the highways except the Bronx River Parkway. And you'd have to, well, you didn't have to add New Jersey, except insofar, and these were included, the projects that he had done in cooperation with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, specifically the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. That's how big his impact it would have gone. You couldn't have done it. But even in the 5 boroughs alone, what we're seeing here, 300 plus square miles, it was impossible to capture the totality of what he had done. And in fact, if you know the Power Broker, you know that several pages of the beginning of the Power Broker just list all the highways, the parkways, the bridges, the tunnels, the parks, the playgrounds, and then that he was directly responsible for, and then all the other major projects, such as the United Nations and Lincoln Center, did seminal role in formative role. He may not have been the leader of them. So how do you capture all that? It takes pages in a book. What would be a more evocative way to capture it? And I think this model was his attempt to show you the canvas he was working on, which was the city of New York, which of course predated him by 300 years, but his attempts to reshape it, and as Caro says, he did more than any person to reshape a city in history. The only possible rival, you would say, would be Baron Haussmann in Paris, who, through his efforts with his, giant boulevards and so forth. But Paris would be like this on this model. It was tiny compared to what Moses was doing. So Moses was building these incredible parkways and highways, expressways, that were tying the city together. He was building these enormous parklands and rebuilding Prospect Park and Central Park. Of course, he was building all of these bridges, having started with Triborough, going on to Broad Swipestone, Broad's Neck, half of the Arizona Narrows Bridge, Marine Bay Parkway. He also had worked on the tunnels. He hated tunnels. Why did he hate tunnels? Well, one reason was you couldn't see them on a model. And they're there though, and he had been involved in them as well. And more than that, he had cleaned up New York. He had taken the sort of ragged edges that he had found in the 1920s and 30s, all these jagged, ragged edges of the city. And you see this kind of smooth, clean corner, which is a park and a parkway. He was very, very proud of that. All of this stuff here had been cleaned up in the Bronx. So he was going to tell his story through the model. I don't think it really worked. I don't think it, because to the point that in 74, 10 years later, people still didn't really know what he had done or who he was. But it was an attempt, and a kind of, in a way, very human attempt, to do a kind of epitaph, or whatever you want to call it, a twilight biography of everything you've done. I'll leave it here in a minute.
Thank you, James, and hello, everyone. I'm so glad you started us off with a biography or a biographical impulse that's buried in this model. And I can say that, you know, I'm a new New Yorker. I've only lived in the city 20 years, and this object actually predates me, which is, at this point, very few things I can say that about. But I think what's fascinating to think about is I won't be pointing to anything specific, but what is fascinating to think about for me as an anthropologist who's really engaged in comparative study, the city I come from, which is Mumbai, is very much, very, very similar to New York. And in fact, during my lifetime, I've seen the kind of changes that you're speaking about with Robert Carroll in a city of comparable size and much bigger population, of course. So my fascination with this object actually lies in the fact that many cities in the world are today kind of in this phase of expansion that is written all over this 3D model. A strange scaled object. It's neither a map nor a model really, it's a hybrid of both. And we have so many other tools at our disposal today to understand how cities are organized. And yet, something like this where you can see the entire landscape within which we as individuals, as human beings, operate and lead our lives is actually phenomenal. It's something that I, personally can't get over. And it's interesting that to think of it as a miniature version of what is writ large, because no page of a book can actually show all of this at this, in a way that is comprehensible. That is knitted together. So cities always have this dual impulse. One is that they are seen from individual experience, and individual experience can never actually comprehend this scale, this geographic scale. And on the other hand, very few people are able to experience it at this geographic scale. And among them are people who are specially trained, architects, urban planners, and of course, Robert Moses was unique because he was a city government official. And many cities don't actually have a person who combines those qualities, who's able to see the whole at once and execute the parts at the same time. And I think so, the introduction that you gave, James, is absolutely sort of on point in that helping us to read this as a narrative and bringing in our own stories to it.
I wonder too, just because this was super intriguing to me, James, when we spoke, thinking about also the evolution of mapping technologies and specifically how the city kind of transformed in its ability to be mapped. So I wonder if you just want to.
Well, what we talked about was, I took it all the way back to the 1840s and 1850s, which historians now look at. We looked at it ourselves in our series. There came a moment, nobody knows exactly when, but sometime in the 1840s, New York and cities like New York, there really no city bigger than New York in the United States, got too big for any one person to understand. Until that time, New York was really a village. You could walk one end to the other in 2 hours, if that, an hour. You could reasonably, a man like Philip Hone, who was the mayor of New York, who was a famous diarist in the 1830s and 40s, it could be said that he knew everyone in New York. He didn't literally know everyone in New York, but you could kind of know every person of influence and activity in New York. And then, starting around the 1840s and 1850s, New York's population by now is about 250,000, 300, it's going up by 50,000 people a year virtually. It just got too big. So what develops is a series of instruments by which ordinary people can know the city. What are they? Well, among others, obvious things, like the newspaper. The newspaper tells you, you get to read the newspaper every day, and it will tell you what's going on in your city, because there are special people called reporters, and they will go places that you don't go or can't go, and they will interview people. So that's one form. Another form, sort of odd, would be the detective story, sort of similar to a newspaper. You have another character, the detective, who similarly is your ambassador. He or she can go to places high and low in class and all around. And so these were ways in which ordinary people could understand a city which had gotten too big to understand. A little later came panoramas, what they called panoramas, which were not bits, but were giant like murals that went around like this, huge murals. That was another thing. Another thing was lithographs of the city. Mike Wallace, the great historian, makes the point that until the 1850s, most views of New York, and if you think about it, if you know anything about it, you'll realize this is true. Most views of New York showed New York from into the city, as if you were arriving for the first time. But after the 1850s, you get a series of views that are from church steeples, looking out, and they are 360-degree views, or very wide views of the city from a high point. So now we're getting closer. Then came the observation deck, which started in the 1860s and 1870s, where people, they realized that people pay money to go to the top of tall buildings and look out on the city. First it was a quarter and 75 cents. And of course that culminated in 1931 with the Empire State Building opening. 1 million people visited it its first year. That's how exciting it was to people. Because it was difficult to understand. And remember, this is really crucial, and was even true when this miniature was built. Hardly anybody went in airplanes. The number of flights out of what was then Idlewild Field was about 100 or 1,000, I don't know the exact number. But you had to be rich to fly in an airplane. And you certainly wouldn't go in a helicopter or something like that. So ordinary people did not fly over the city. Now, of course, it's the most common thing in the world, and everybody loves to post shots on social media when they come into New York at night, and there are all the lights, and my beautiful city, I'm coming home to it, blah, blah, blah. But that was extraordinarily unusual. I can tell you that when this opened in '64, maybe 1 out of 100 people had seen New York from the air. So there were a whole host of techniques to try to comprehend the city, of which this was a great one. Now, of course, they had maps, and they had a big innovation and one of the things that made this miniature possible was aerial photography. New York did the first comprehensive aerial photography in 1926 or 7. The Fairchild Company photographed New York looking straight down, flying over the city very carefully, almost the way you do with modern days. You do a search. You know, you go like this, and go like this, and go like this, and go like this, and just shooting with a special high resolution camera, pointed straight down, shooting this area, and then shooting this area. And what they created was a book that planners and demographers and other people could use, and it shows that New York City, 5-borough city, very carefully, and updated versions of it were made every couple of years. And when they built the model, in the beautiful book that Liz did and her colleagues did, you'll see, in fact, they had a whole library array of those photographs, which is what they used to build the model. So that was another very important way of understanding the city, although admittedly one that only an elite group took. Now, I guess following on your thoughts, one of the ideas here was by 1964, planners and architects were very familiar with using these kinds of models or miniatures to plan cities and think about cities and understand cities, but ordinary people did not. There were no community boards in those days. They told you and this we're going to get into the more problematic or critical explorations of this model, I think, in a minute. But you lived in a neighborhood, you read in the newspaper that your neighborhood was being torn down because a planner had decided, a group of planners had decided that they were going to build one of these guys. And there was no model that you could look at, there was no community board you could go to and complain. And it was a big problem for ad hoc or impromptu community groups to try to even find out what the plans were and find out what they were fighting because the government controlled them. Now, needless to say, we live in a different era. New York City is one of the pioneers. They have a thing called Pluto, the land use, planimetric land use, I've forgotten what, Pluto. And it's an interactive mapping device that's accessible to everyone. Anyone who goes online can use it. It has the same information that planners have. And it's complete democratization, thanks to the internet, of these kinds of ways of seeing the city. But true in 64.
I guess, the one thing that I'll add to this is that, James, you brought up the fact that, at some point, you can actually mark the moment in which New York stops being a kind of face-to-face community and just explodes into something that can never really be comprehended by one human being, either visually or even imaginatively, right? So these tools then become invaluable for placing oneself in the city. In the same way that a detective could place themselves in the city to uncover what was actually going on. Because by that point, in almost all modern cities, the actions that impacted your life as a person had become so diverse and diffused that it was not possible to comprehend them without the aid of external tools, without the aid of investigative tools, let's say. We may not think of this as an investigative tool today, but when it was produced, it could well be that it has the same kinds of. I think even today, I see people looking for their buildings. If they knew the age of when their particular building was constructed, they could find it on this panorama, and we still find people looking at it in that way. So I think for that reason, also it's a different kind of object than, say, Pluto, right? Say the most contemporary mapping software, which requires you to already have a certain vision for the future. But this is an object that you can interact with in a different way. You can sort of find yourself, your past, the possible past that you may have occupied, and go back in time in some ways.
So I just want to follow up on that to kind of think about this idea both of you were speaking about of the use, right, of this object. So in 1964, the fair carried on until October of 1965, and then the building closed to get it ready to open again to the public after the fair. So this model was maintained in the building and was very much meant to be a city planning tool and an educational informational tool. So it was actually updated in its entirety, which was of course on a much smaller scale, in 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, and then 74, and then it stopped. until fundamentally a few varied interventions throughout the 80s, but only in 1992 was the model removed to be updated to what you see today. So what we are actually looking at today, which I would love to be our next kind of jumping off point, is January 1, 1992. So, you know, again, 25 years, over 25 years, there's lots that is still here, as we know, like, we can all very quickly identify the Twin Towers, which we know are sadly no longer present, still there. We see areas, though, that are also seemingly desolate, that we know are very different and animated in a whole new way today. So I think it's an interesting thing to think that this model, really the goal when it debuted was that architects and planners would actually submit plans for new buildings, and the buildings would be on the model, say 6 months before the building was completed, so new traffic patterns could be predicted and new, you know, arenas for television and radio signals could be put together based on population increases density. That is not what this tool was used for. Parts were not taken out for City Hall planning sessions like was originally anticipated, and due to the date that it was last updated, of course, there are many things that are missing. So I would like to, I guess, hand it back to you two to think about both, yes, what is apparent, but also what is both tragically missing in this 30-year period that has been fallow since it's been updated, but also kind of ideas of what we can imagine and think about are missing on a more perhaps human level.
Sure, I think that's a great question. And it's very, I think there's a huge amount of history secretly buried in those dates. I think that the 1964-65 World's Fair was a watershed in American culture, because it was the last year, 2 years, that there was an unbridled belief in progress. That I think progress had been such a driving force in American culture for a century or more, 150 years, and nowhere more so than New York. So there was really a belief that change was good, and that the city was getting better and better, and the country too. And sure, there were challenges and so forth, but that on the whole, this model in 1964-65 represented, as they would have said, 300 years of progress. And there really was a belief, for example, that when you tore down this kind of stuff and built this kind of stuff, you were improving the city, for sure, no question. People, as Robert Moses would have said, getting people out of the brickeries, leftover language from 1875, and into sanitary and clean housing. I think that after 65, certainly after 66, thanks in part to much larger forces, notably the Vietnam War, I don't think it was possible to, by 1972 and 73, the idea not just of progress, but of technologically driven progress, that new technologies were always, and new ideas were always making life better, was being put into heavy question. And no more so than in a book like The Power Book, where in 1974, that's not a book that would have been written in 1964, just wouldn't have been written. And by 1974, when Robert Caro writes The Power Book, it's called, Robert Moses and the Fall of New York. The Fall of New York, quite a phrase. The idea that the sort of what they would have regarded by 1974 as the kind of simple-minded belief that change is always good, that new is better than old, and that particularly modernist changes to the city are, meaning freeways, highways, bridges, and housing projects, modernist housing projects like Stuyvesant Town, Starry City, or Co-op City in the Bronx, were always better than what had come before. It was being put under severe question, and with it, the very idea of a model like this in the first place. Which is to say, in the 60s, an alternate way of thinking about cities, which it's not like it was invented with this one book, but it was certainly crystallized with this one book, not the Power Book, but book called The Death and Life of Great American Cities, written by Jane Jacobs, published in 1961 by Random House, in which she called into question everything, all of it. She called into question everything about the new vision of the city that people had been proposing by then for 50 or 60 years. And not only did she call into question that the value of these what people call tower and park housing projects, that you see here, she reiterated the value of the traditional streets of New York. You can all read the book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's my favorite book about New York. But there was another thing about it. She changed the point of view. She brought the point of view back down to the street, to the stoop, to the sidewalk. And she looked very carefully at a single neighborhood, Greenwich Village, right here, where she lived, and she explored in depth the way that that neighborhood worked. And she saw all kinds of things that you would never see, not only with this miniature, but of the ways in which people built this miniature thought. And so there was no need of it. Well, nobody cared. No one cared. No one cared about the new. First of all, they weren't building so much. That's another thing. They weren't building after 1968, 69. None of these new projects were built. New York wasn't building much at all for 30 or 40 years. And but beyond that, the whole sense of this kind of Ubermensch, godlike view of the city had really been superseded by planners and architects. So powerful was the influence of Jane Jacobs' book that the whole underlying concept of this model had been thrown into question. Now, curiously, I think, go on, I'll stop here, but I think that began to change again in 2000 with the construction of the Trade Center, which was going to have to be replaced with something very big, and the arrival of Michael Bloomberg to office. I think that was going to begin to change. But I'll leave it there. Pick it up.
Yeah, actually, if you look at this, in the book, if you look at the conversation that Valerie and I had, it's very much about, what's missing. We started from the present, and so thinking about what this object means in the present. What does it make visible? What does it leave out? What remains invisible in the panorama? And it sort of led us down different garden paths of thinking about, really about Jane Jacobs' influence, if you will, the human dimensions of life, and how, and what those dimensions be represented. Can they actually be represented in this form? I think that was a large part of our conversation, looking back on it. And what I would say is that I think we still need some kind of tool to narrate ourselves. And this is a tool that's as good as any. And I think also, one thing that James, you said about the sort of post-2001 New York, which is when you again begin to see the resurgence of it's a very important moment to think about how the 21st century in New York has been basically marked by construction that doesn't really have a kind of ideology of progress as such behind it, but in fact is always responding to a variety of crises, whether it was 9/11 or it was Sandy, for example. And all of the sort of the fear that we have of the future of a dense and wonderful, incredible environment like New York, and what its future is going to be. I think this is a moment for us to again look back on the panorama as as a tool to imagine different kinds of futures that might happen on this amazing landscape, very socio-technical landscape, let's say. And one thing I will say is that for me, this object actually flattens out all of the different forms of building. Apart from the vertical densities that sort of pop up every now and then, what we can see in this is the way in which an object like this can also serve as a leveling tool for us to look at this entire space as something that's been stitched together. It's not, so you can't actually change one part of the city without affecting all of the rest of it. And I think that's what this object really makes me in a very powerful way still.
Yeah, I wonder as well how you both feel about giving us either an imagining for the use of this model in the future, which is something I think, you both are experts and thinkers and as critical as you are imaginative. So for you, what, as far as this model, gets you the most excited for future uses? It's a question I think many people have coming into this model oftentimes.
Well, obviously, if you were to update, it's a huge effort. It would not have been a huge effort in 1999, but hardly been any kind of effort in the 7 years, and it's not just that it's another 30 years and 25 years since then. The city has dramatically changed, and all of this is gone now basically. And Brooklyn Bridge Park, we've now replaced that. The South Street Seaport area. This is all, this is Battery Park City. Well, Battery Park City is there. There have been dramatic. There's a whole new high-rise landscape. There would be a second one of these over here. There are about 300 buildings, tall, big buildings you have to have. Because of all the work that went in under Mayor Bloomberg with Amanda Burden and Dan Doctorow to rezone all of this from manufacturing, which was pretty much gone, to all new high-rise development. So you would have a lot of work to do. It would be fascinating, and what I would recommend is to actually take some of these sections out, rebuild them, and put them and save the originals. Because I think it would be really wonderful to have a small exhibition with the changes. Another thing that I did in a previous project for Wall Street Rising, which was a group that was created down on Wall Street here after 9/11. We took a big model. Now, it wasn't like this. It was a big 3D vertical model of Lower Manhattan. And we used, just like I'm doing now, we used not laser light, but very high intensity light to light up parts of it and tell the story. And we had a narration, and we told the history of the city using these kinds of lights, and basically using it as, again, a kind of canvas, literally, that you could show. So, because there's so much history embodied in this model. And it was done in '64. One important thing about it is 64 roughly would mark the year that there were no more empty spaces. But only 64. If it had been built in '59, there were still unbuilt, hard to imagine, but there were still unbuilt parts of New York at the far edge of Queens, and a very few at the far edge of Brooklyn, and certainly in Staten Island. Now every part of the city was built on. So there's just an amazing amount, never mind, obviously, all of this would have to be redone. But I think you could activate the model using new technologies. And then you could even have an interactive component in which people could sort of activate it themselves. You could light up things that you were interested in and so forth. That's where we are today. So.
Yeah, I think, James, that's definitely a direction that one could take. Because, I mean, this is, basically when you look at it, it's full of ghosts, if you look at it from the point of view of today. And I think that those ghosts somehow need to be brought to life for us to think of a future as a collective future, really, for all of New York, all New Yorkers, especially as we are in this moment of tremendous growth and physical growth, actually, of vertical growth, let's say. We no longer have any land to build on, so we're going into the sky and creating basically creating property out of thin air. I think this is a moment when we're also we've positioned ourselves as a sanctuary city, and there are obligations to all kinds of groups and citizens who have been really erased by many waves of transformation that we need to, we could use something like the Panorama to revive and as James suggested, technology can help us to interact with this model. It can become an incredibly powerful narrative tool, in my view. And to help all kinds of New Yorkers, new, old, native, not native, to find themselves.
I think that is a fabulous point to kind of close this portion on, but I did want to open up to maybe a handful of Q&As. I don't know if anyone has anything. I found that it's lovely to do Q&A in here because we can all still have a reference and of course hear our speakers with their answers clearly. So if anyone does have a question, I maybe just request you raise your hand and I can kind of levy mine in your direction. Oh, we have one over here to my right. Yep. No, it's okay.
So how does the patent company play any role in this society? They basically scaled up the patent company. Actually, patent company, which is the New York City patent company, you have the maps on the wall.
I have not heard that. So from the actual construction of this, there were a multitude of resources. They used all of the aerial photography James was speaking about. They used over 3,000 oblique images, which are taken from the street at an angle upward to get detail of buildings. They also used Sanford maps, which are the the insurance maps that tell you so many details about the contents of the building. And then of course, resourced by municipal agencies to get more details per department. But I will investigate that. I love a conspiracy theory, so give me something. That's great. We had a question right here as well. Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. So this visitor asked about the space and asking if the Panorama was always here. It was in fact always here. So when the building was built in '39, after the '39 fair, the building became a recreational facility. And this footprint was actually an indoor roller rink, which occurred pretty much from the 50s after the building was used as the first United Nations General Assembly, which occurred between 46 and 50. So when the '64 fair came up, they wanted to use a space in this institution for this Panorama, and the roller rink as opposed to the ice skating rink, which was on the other side, and you can see reflected by the footprint of 3 little stairs in what we call the sunken living room. That was an ice skating rink. So they decided to keep that portion and then built the gallery to house this model. And there was also actually the walkway that we are standing on was not in existence. It was a helicopter ride. So you would get in over at the front door by Manhattan. You would be with potentially 3 of your friends or family in a little helicopter, and you would run the same perimeter with a really lovely monologue by Lowell Thomas, who was a radio broadcaster at the time, telling you all about the history of New York, the importance of the city, the importance of the municipal agencies and all the resources that were available to you. So you would get spit out on the top and just be able to see the panorama from that bird's eye view, which still at that point was remarkable, right? Well, it was moved to be renovated. So they took out, there are 272 panels, so they removed all of them when we did the renovation in 1992. But other than that, buildings and different details were added to. That was the only time that it was really taken out in its entirety. Piece by piece, yep, exactly.
Mention of the helicopter ride should remind us that just across the way, across the road, literally, was one of the most important, probably the most important model in the history of cities, which was the 1939 General Motors Futurama, which had been built for the first fair in the General Motors Pavilion, which was across the highway from here, in the transportation section. And it was an incredible, it was bigger than this. It's like 4 times the size of this, 5 times maybe, it's about an acre, I think. And it was a vision of the future of America that had been designed by Norman Belgettis, who was the leading industrial designer, among the leading industrial designers of his day. And people would get into little compartments, and they had the issue of like, how could you keep what in the biz they call throughput? How do you keep the people moving? And the answer was to put them in compartments that would go around the model while a voice would be in their ear telling them what they were seeing. And although it had sections that had to do with rural areas and farmland and hydroelectric, dams and things like that, the part that everyone remembered was the vision of the future of the city. It was not New York in particular, although there were buildings from New York in it. But it basically suggested wiping away all of New York and replacing it with this futuristic vision of what cities of the future would look like, laced with highways, the General Motors Pavilion, and cars. So that affected people's idea of what the future was going to be more than any other single thing. I mean, millions of people saw it, tens of millions of people saw it. The Futurama, by the way, came back in the '64 fair, but it was, even as a kid, I knew it was ridiculous. It was like people living in underwater and on the moon and in Antarctica. It had no meaning for ordinary people, because who was going to live on the moon or in Antarctica? Maybe Elon Musk. But the '39 one really meant something, because it really was a vision of the future with these little helicopter rides around it.
Also, fun fact that Raymond Lester, who made this model, actually worked on that 1939 Futurama model with Belgettis, which was great. And yeah, it was almost exactly 3 times the footprint of this. This is almost 10,000 square feet, and the Futurama from '39 was 33,000 square feet. So absolutely gigantic, and was meant to show you 1960. So of course, with the '64 fair, perfect opportunity to kind of continue to project forward. Yeah.
You could argue that to some degree the dream had been realized. The highways had been built. They had cut right across the existing city. The futuristic bridges had been built, and some of the '39 fair had come to pass.
Sorry, question here. Yeah, so he asked if there was an archive of the tapes used in this panorama ride during the World's Fair, and yeah, we do have the audio from Lowell Thomas. There was one in the model, and then there was another one just outside in a set of exhibition displays over there. So yeah, we have those. Yeah. Yep. Yes, so the question was the intention to really be every single house? And the answer is yes. So Robert Moses projected and told Lester that he had a 1% margin of error for this model, which is absolutely bananas as far as thinking about, the scope. But this is why it truly took 3 years to do it, because there were teeny tiny templates. And check out the book, please, in the gift shop, because there's incredible archival photos of the process of the way in which a photo transferred to a drawing transferred to a template got transferred onto a piece, and then all the pieces were brought together. So yeah, and there's a whole organizational system as well, with buildings color-coded based on size and based on utilization. So is it a manufacturing or a residential property, commercial property? So yeah, the detail was meant to be for functional use with city planning as well. Yeah.
One of the secrets that's embedded in the model of the secrets of New York is that 90% of the buildings in New York are based on about 5 or 6 or 7 typologies. For those, we've got some architects in the crowd, what architects call typologies. So they didn't have to build every single building because you had row houses, you had tenements, you new law and old law tenements, you had attached houses and detached houses of a few types. You had apartment houses, low, mid-rise apartment houses and higher-rise apartment houses. And you had housing project blocks of one kind or another. And once you've done those, what I just listed, you've done about 75% of the buildings in New York City. So although there are 800,000 buildings here, that doesn't mean there are 800,000 individual buildings here. They could go in the drawer and pull out blocks of row houses, which were the same. And that was true and still is true, that New York is based, the building blocks of New York are actually just, two hands will cover most of them.
Yep, we got a lot of questions over here. I'm not looking around, but okay, go ahead. The World's Fair is not represented on the panorama other than the artifacts that remain as of 1992. So the Unisphere is there, the heliport, which was formerly the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority building.
Port Authority.
Oh, Port Authority. Excuse me. Pardon. We have the Hall of Science, which remained as well. So other than the buildings that were on site in 1992, the World's Fair is not commemorated on the model. Yeah.
We should say that Robert Moses, one of the reasons he got involved with the World's Fair Corporation was the dream of creating the new Central Park of New York. Not the Central Park that was in the middle of Manhattan, but the Central Park that would be in the middle of the entire five-borough city. And his vision was, his fantasy really, was to take the fairgrounds here, Flushing Meadows, and make a giant permanent park and use all the money that they were going to make on the World's Fair to pay for it. And so that there were, permanent buildings like the Unisphere was never going to be taken down, nor was this building. And what happened, of course, if you read Caro's book, spoiler alert, the World's Fair ended up losing a huge amount of money. And they could barely pay for the demolition of the buildings, much less the creation of a new park. Over the years, Flushing Meadow Park has in fact become a great park for people who live in Queens. But it was nothing like what Moses had in mind.
Yes, other question here. This is true. So for a very long time, after the ride was out of commission in the kind of like late 60s, early 70s, the only way to view the panorama was through windows that were at this top layer where the Bronx was. They were taken out when we did the renovation to bring the walkway inside. So yeah, early 2000s. Pretty much. Yeah. Right. We have had several conversations about it, and we'll keep you posted. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good idea. I just want to see any other questions out in the crowd. Okay, right here. Yep. Yeah. So there were fundamentally models given to us, and these are other places. So this visitor asked why Citi Field is updated and Yankee Stadium is updated, which you will notice is true. Battery Park is also updated, and then you also have the wastewater plant in Greenpoint. That's much more recent as well. So these were kind of models given to us by other institutions on city land. So this is also the comedy that this is, was produced as a city model by city agencies fundamentally, but for the World's Fair. And actually, the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority did manage it between the mid-60s and 1970. And only in 1972, which is when the Queens Museum was inaugurated, were we then the owners of this model. So yeah, so it's just the city lands fundamentally that have offered them to us. We put them on. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. We love a question about maintenance. We love a question about maintenance. So with maintenance, we clean it in its entirety twice a year. And comically, I really only just found this out in the book. The model was very much intended to be walked on, and they quoted that up to 1,000 people could be on the model at the same time. Currently, absolutely not. But the way that the typologies are rendered, as James was saying, you know, the majority of the land is occupied by like 1 to 3 story, whether residential or commercial properties. All of those are made out of injection mold plastic, so they are very strong. It's only once you get to the more customized buildings, the larger buildings, the more idiosyncratic buildings, that those are all individual made of paper and wood and cannot be traversed at all. So what we do is utilize foam and you know, microfiber booties and a very high-grade HEPA, very low-intensity vacuum to kind of get the dust, and then we truly go in with paintbrushes for certain areas, and it takes one person about 2 weeks to do the whole model. And then other than that, we do just intermediate for events and stuff. We have school groups in here just about every day, so you'd be surprised. We do often find gum wrappers and pencils and brochures, so we get to have a that little moment every once in a while. But yeah, definitely a lot of maintenance, and I'm very happy to report that we're currently working on a small conservation grant that was given to us by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So we'll be doing some updates which include, as you can see on this view, the lights. There are these teeny tiny lights that you can see, about 27 of them. There's actually over 3,000 of them that were on the original model, but we are requiring to redo the entirety of that system. And it was a very complex element of the original ride, of the original demonstration, to show you different elements of New York City's municipal offerings. So you could have, you know, one track that would show you colleges and high schools and middle schools. You'd have another track that would show you police departments and fire departments, to really get a sense of how well municipal organizations were distributed across New York City. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's mostly plastic. Of the buildings, at least, yeah. One more question, yeah. Okay. Well, just because they gave us the updated model that was, because it's on parkland, it's on city land, so they gave it to us. That's the best explanation I can give you. Yeah, I know it used to be Shea Stadium, but yeah, it was just, it's updated because we're in the same park. Yeah. We do have Shea Stadium in the archives. Very exciting. Anyone else? Last licks here for questions? No, not as of now. The question was if we're going to update the World Trade Center, and currently we are not planning for any update of the sort. Okay, everyone. Well, that concludes our tour. Thank you for and please feel free to join us. We're just going to hang out in the atrium. The books are available for sale in the museum shop. Feel free to grab one if you'd like to get the authors to sign it. We also have Mark Miller here, who's one of the incredible authors of the book. And yeah, we'd love to see and talk to you. Thanks again, everyone.
I actually learned something new, ladies and gentlemen. Good to see everybody. If I missed you, obviously I was being quiet because the authors of this great book were here talking about the model. And again, if you don't know what this is the Panorama of New York City, a scale model of the entire city of New York. I know this is a very different live stream than I would normally do, you know, because I'm not talking. So I really do appreciate everyone who indulged me with this. And I hope you guys found this a little bit interesting. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go get my book signed. I'm going to have some words with the authors because, again, I truly obsess over this thing. If you're ever come out to Queens, if you ever come out, which is right here, if you ever come to Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, and come here to visit the Unisphere and and Queens, deep in Queens, please come out here to the Panorama. It is truly a really cool thing to see. Gives you a really great idea of what the city's skyline looked like, especially with the World Trade Center. It's interesting. I've heard in the past that they only plan on updating the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center when the whole complex is complete. So I heard that years back. I don't know if that's still true today. It's nice to know that some of the retired buildings are in the archives. I'm gonna ask maybe, if is there going to be an exhibition in the future where they're going to show off all the retired buildings? Because it'll be nice to see Shea Stadium and the original Yankee Stadium and everything. But again, if you've never seen this before, it is really an incredible thing to see. And it gives you an idea of what. Not sure if this has been said, but I think this would be your ideal tour guide job. If I could tour inside of this building, I will do that any day. We're going to come back on a little bit later after I get my book signed. And we're going to do one last walkthrough here of the Panorama. And then we're going to go out into Flushing Meadow. And we'll go in. We'll be in landscape so we could get a little bit better view for you guys. But I didn't want to bother anyone. But doing this. And plus I wanted to focus on the presentation. The museum's only open for another a couple of hours or so. So I'm going to get my book signed and ask authors a question. Again, there's a new book. And I would love to come in here with a laser pointer. And maybe we'll do that in the future. I'll come in here with a laser pointer and we'll really do a proper, look at this. It is really an incredible model. And I mean, of course, the little plane that takes off and lands from LaGuardia. That's, I know, a lot of y'all's favorite part of the model. And what more can I say? So I'm gonna let you guys go for now. I thank you guys so much for indulging me with this. Thank you so much for the 130 likes. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate that very much. And from the Queens Museum, this is dutchmazz signing off. Have a fabulous Queens Day, whether you can afford to live out here or not. Hug your loved ones, cherish those moments, and I will see you later, Mrs. Calabash. Wherever you are. You're more than welcome, guys. Yeah, I'm gonna come back on in a few minutes. And we'll be in landscape mode, and we're gonna walk around visible storage. We'll walk around the model one last time, and then we'll go out into the park, and we'll get a view of the Unisphere. The Unisphere looks absolutely gorgeous in the snow. So I'd love to show you guys that. So we'll be back on in a little bit. All right, guys. See you in a little bit.